Hi there, my name's Andrew James Greig, and I'm here to talk about Whirligig, which has been shortlisted for the McIlvanney Prize this year. First of all, thank you very much, Lindsay, for inviting me to your blog to talk about this. I'll give a little reading from the prologue. I'll talk a little bit about myself and my writing technique, and then answer a few questions that previously have been sent my way. So let's kick off with the scene setter, kicking off from the prologue. The old oak whispers in the dead of night, fresh leaves rubbing against each other as a cool breeze catches the branches in a playful embrace. The tree stands alone in the glen, deep roots lying exposed on the surface where a rough track has worn away the thin topsoil. Higher up in the tree, and concealed by the canopy, a rabbit gently swings, suspended from a wire. The rabbit slowly descends through the hours of darkness, the movement so slight that it appears not to move at all. Minute increments, just one small step at a time, measured. The rabbit's head is held at a quizzical angle, as if this aerial view of the ground below were a novelty, but the rabbit's eyes are dull with death and stare uselessly as they bulge out of a furry face, morphed into an agonized sneer. The neck is broken, and a wire snare holds the animal tight in a deathly grip. The wire continues higher into the tree, where it joins with a peculiar mechanism constructed from bone and exquisitely carved wood. This arboreal ossuary is alive, insofar as the other untrusting occupants of the tree are concerned, and they watch its movements and listen to the rhythmic creak of its mechanical heart with suspicion. Each measured drop of the rabbit provides fresh impetus to bone gears, transmitting rotary movement via the main pulley, meshing with each interconnected neighbour in an intricate ballet of bone wheels, cogs and spindles, all held in place within a skeleton case of polished branches and carved twigs. In the heart of the calibre silently beats a balance wheel, a perfect disc of silver and gold. So that's part of the prologue, which is basically setting the scene of this old tree in a fairly lonely glen with a clockwork mechanism performing its deadly purpose. The idea of Whirligig came to me just out of the blue. I had this idea of using clockwork mechanisms to construct machines for killing people. Shows what goes on in my head. And the beauty of this is that the murderer can set these things up days, weeks in advance of the actual event occurring, so they don't have to be present at the scene of crime, which makes it all the more difficult for my DI Kostorfin, and his colleague DC Frankie Blair to try and solve. The location for these events is a very fictitious Fort William. I avoided mentioning the name of the town in the first book, although I've almost finished writing a second one in the series now, which does mention it. But I hasten to add it is a fictional version of Fort William. I chose Fort William because at the age of 18, I'd not done very well in my A-levels. Insofar as no one actually expected me to even be able to take A-levels. So I guess it wasn't that surprising that I failed them. And I stuck my thumb out from a little town in Wales where I was living and hitched all the way up to Fort William, where I got a job with the Forestry Commission. And I worked for them for quite a few months. And I guess it must be the scenery working around Loch Lochy and Loch Arkaig, and living in Fort William that has inspired me to write the book and place it there. Whirligig is the second book I've ever written. I only started writing just over 3 years ago now, and the first book really lives in a genre of its own as a fairy tartan noir, and it basically details the adventures of Thomas the Rhymer, who disappeared or died in the 16th century, and I have him reappearing on Rannoch Moor in the present day. So it's sort of written from the perspective of a detective novel, but involves mythological creatures such as fairies, who aren't very pleasant in my book. And as a result, I don't think anyone really knew where it could be placed on the bookshelves. So I self-published it. And the point of that little aside is really that if you want to write a book, then I really recommend you just write it for your own benefit. And if you want to publish it, you don't have to have a publisher. And getting a publisher is quite difficult. I fully appreciate that. So you can always just publish it yourself and be done with it. Anyway, luckily, my second book, Whirligig, has been taken by a publisher. It was taken by Fledgling Press, who very kindly entered me for this McIlvanney Prize. And amazingly enough, I was longlisted, and then almost unbelievably, I've been shortlisted. And the next few days, we'll find out where we go from there. But I'm really happy that I've been shortlisted. I'm not expecting anything else. The questions I have been asked by people is one of the most common ones, I guess, is do you plan your stories? And the short answer to that is no. I just start with a blank sheet of paper and start writing, and hopefully it all comes together in the end. I guess it's not quite true to say I don't plan it, because by the time you get to halfway through the book, 2/3 of the way through certainly, you'll have these various strands and you have to tie them together, otherwise you don't end up with a book that anyone's going to enjoy, because it has to make sense in some way or other. So yeah, a bit of fiendish work involved in tying all the disparate strands together. It's a bit like tapestry, I guess. You've got all these little bits of yarn, hence spinning a yarn, I guess, and you have to end up with a picture at the end of it, or at least a pattern that is pleasing to the eye, and hopefully I accomplish that with Whirligig. The other questions I get asked is, what inspired me to write in the first place? Well, that's more of a difficult question to answer, to be honest, because I literally haven't written anything since probably I was 13 or something in doing O-level English and having to write just a piece of fiction, a couple of sides of A4, whatever. And I've never touched anything similar until about 3 years ago, when I just wrote the prologue to my first book. And I was so interested as to what on earth this was all about that I continued with it. And now I do seem to have the bug. So yeah, I've got books aplenty in me, and one good thing about lockdown, I guess, is I've got nothing but spare time on my hands at the moment. So they're slowly being converted into stories. Unusual questions I've been asked. Why clockwork mechanisms? As I say, when I was very young, I lived in London until I was probably about 12, I think it was, when I moved to Wales with the family. But at the early years in London, I used to love going to jumble sales, of which there used to be many. And the first thing I'd do is equip myself with one of these old prams, for two reasons. One, because the wheels made really good go-karts. And the second was you can get an awful lot in a pram. And I used to buy these ancient old clocks, massive great things, and wind-up gramophones, all that sort of thing, literally for pennies. And I'd wheel them all home, delighted to have them, and pull them to bits and get them working where I could. And as a result, the house used to fill up with all sorts of rubbish, which that was back in the day when there were things called rag and bone men who used to come around. So I think I was an early recycler, probably, because the rag and bone men probably sold it off for jumble, and the jumble sold it back to me, and round and round we went. So I think that was probably the fascination with clockwork mechanisms. The more weirder questions I've been asked recently is, if I had a time machine, where would I go? Or when would I go? That was quite an interesting one, actually. And where my imagination took me was back to a place called Slad, which is in the Cotswolds, down in the south of England. I used to live in Bristol for quite a long time. And I used to love touring around the Cotswolds and finding these funny little villages with their quaint little cottages and stuff. Although mostly they belong to well-to-do people now. But Slad was the home of a gentleman called Whirligig, and he wrote a couple of lovely books. One called Cider with Rosie, which is a sort of a coming-of-age, repressed sexuality in the countryside sort of number. And the other one was As I Walked Out One Midsummer Morning, which details his exploits, putting his fiddle on his back and heading off to fight in the Spanish Civil War on the side of the communists. And that book, probably more than any, inspired me as a young man to put my thumb out and hitch around. So one of the journeys you know about to Fort William to work for the Forestry Commission, but I spent an awful lot of summers disappearing off into over to the continent and hitching all round and just sleeping where I could and finding people. I ended up usually with little raggle-taggle groups of people following me around. It was very strange. But yeah, it brought a love of just taking myself out there and seeing where I ended up. Other questions I asked is, what my career allows me to write. Well, my career, when I finally went back and got some A-levels, after all, you'll be pleased to know, was mostly in engineering, electronic and software engineering in the aerospace industry. That involves a lot of stuff which the Official Secrets Act doesn't allow me to talk about. But I was basically involved in a lot of weapons technology and design, with occasional trips abroad and flying around in helicopters, a bit like James Bond and that sort of stuff. But being a restless soul, I kept dropping that line of work and moving into live sound, where I'd be the fellow doing the sound for Glastonbury Festival or WOMAD Festival, or touring with people like Kappa Cayley, toured around the world with them, for example, or do the sound for Van Morrison, Ravi Shankar, The Fall, a real mix of bands and people. So yeah, there's a huge amount of interesting things I've done in my life, and I guess those now is a good time to start using some of those experiences and people and writing them into books. But safe to say, what happens on tour stays on tour, I think. So anything you'll hear about will be totally and utterly fictitious. I think that's probably my 10 minutes. It's a very short time, but hopefully it gives you an idea as to what the book's about, what I'm about maybe. And, I hope you rush out and buy a copy of it, because I'm very proud of it and so pleased that it's made the McIlvanney list. And it's thanks to people like you, really, who are buying it and saying such nice things about it, that inspires me to keep going. So thank you very much. And thank you, Lindsay, for the opportunity again to talk to you about this. Thank you. Goodbye.